Today, let's look at what the DMG 2024 helps us to create. What does it teach us step by step to make for our games? And how does that compare to 2014? Let's find out today. It's really interesting to compare the 2024 DMG and the 2014 DMGs and see what they teach us to create. Why are some things in there and some things not? And why did they change, in some cases, the approach to how they teach us how to make something? We're going to start with the simplest, the background. If you wanted to teach someone in 2014 how to design, a great place to start was a background, because backgrounds were so simple and so stable from background to background that you could very easily show somebody how to design that, and they could go off of that and then create that as sort of their first piece that they did. So in 2024, backgrounds get a little more complex, and it's good that they add this here. In addition, in 2024, the player's handbook, there's this sort of feeling that the backgrounds are a little heavy and hard-coded, and it's very natural for a player to say, well, I've got this other concept in mind. Now, I do wish the 2024 DMG did a little more work to say, hey, this can be something players drive. I actually would have liked this to be in the player's handbook as the main way people create backgrounds and just make your own. But so be it. Here we are. And let's walk through what it tells us. So it tells us that we can customize a player's handbook background to reflect a particular campaign theme or to help a player craft a particular story. And we get a very simple process. So you choose 3 abilities that you think should represent the background that the background would be good at. And you pick them sort of from different buckets, like strength or dexterity, constitution, intelligence or wisdom, and charisma. And if you look at the way backgrounds work, what you're going to do is you're going to give them the option of choosing 2 of these and getting +2 and +1, or choosing 3 of them and getting +1 to all. So that's why you have 3 abilities that you're using here, which honestly is a little more work than you need to. If the player is doing this, they can just go ahead and do that as part of their design. Step 2 is to choose a feat. And here we are choosing a feat that is of the category origin. So we can look at the player's handbook and go through all of those origin feats. And I'm using D&D Beyond, so you can see that's hyperlinked here, which is helpful. Step 3, choose skill proficiencies, 2 skills appropriate for the background. And they interestingly say there doesn't have to be a relationship between the skill proficiency and the ability scores they increase, though honestly that can be a factor for players, so it's worth, I think, considering that. Number 4 is choose a tool proficiency. Choose one tool that in the practice of this background, it would be used. That's pretty easy to do because there's such a huge list of tools, though it's worth keeping in mind, as you might have seen from my crafting video, that some tools carry a lot more utility if your players are into crafting and things like that. So it's worth considering whether that's important to that background and to the player and your group of players. And the 5th is choosing equipment. And we're told use 50 gold pieces, and some of that can be gold that you are left over, but purchase 50 gold worth. That's your package of equipment that comes with the background, and then anything else is left over. So, and also not to include martial weapons or armor, because they're going to get this from the class. So really simple. It's still a pretty good way for a designer to kind of start and think through backgrounds. I've got no major issues here other than what I've already said before. It works pretty well. And compared to how 2014 worked, good. It's just a little more complicated because of the choice of a feat. So it's going to take you more time to go through all those options and choose a feat. If you're doing this with a player, I would encourage you to just design. Let the player do this design. There's no reason for you to be involved. Nothing should be more broken or whatever. Just let them design it and push their story. That's usually going to be the best outcome. If you're doing this for publication or for your campaign, then that's a little different, where you want to think about what makes sense in the world and dress that up accordingly. Let's quickly take a look at a 2024 proficiency. So here's the Acolyte. You can see we have 3 ability scores. We have a feat that you get based on something that'll fit the concept. You have your 2 skill proficiencies that are granted. You have your tool proficiency, and then a choice of equipment to whether you just get the 50 gold pieces, or are you getting this set that you put together that represents items that this type of a background would have, and then just a short description, right? Unlike 2014, we don't have that big feature, so we don't have to design that. But we do have to think through those ability scores and the feat. So some pluses and minuses there. Next up, we're told how to create a creature, and this one is a drastic change from 2014. In 2024, we get some great art of Baba Yaga making, I mean, that looks like some kind of slod-like toad, but it's a fire-breathing giant toad. Okay. And we are told, here's how to build a custom creature. So one is change the appearances of it. Okay. Then we can change the size and creature type. So take an ogre stat block, make it a human bully, and just make it a medium humanoid instead of a large giant. That's interesting because in 2014, size changes carried specific changes with it, as far as things like hit dice. So it's a very interesting thing that they're telling you to sort of do a thing that doesn't actually equate to the previous advice. That's a change that they're just sort of like, for your purposes as a DM, this doesn't matter. And I think that's pretty interesting. Now, what's also not clear is, are they saying that in 2024, hit dice size is no longer tied to size? I doubt that's the case, but we'll need the monster manual to find out. Then we get the section on ability scores, and they say you can freely change intelligence, wisdom, and charisma from a monster that's existing to whatever you want them to be, unless it's used for spell casting. So you've got a black pudding, you could raise its intelligence to represent that it is actually intelligent or whatever. And then they say, hey, generally don't touch strength, dexterity, and constitution, as these can alter the monster's attack bonus, damage, armor class, or hit points, which can change its challenge rating. And I find that super dissatisfying because I would want to know, great, so if I want to do that, what does that mean? And in 2014, you kind of gave me the option that I was using a table or deriving scores from strength, dexterity, and con. So I should be able to change these and then use that table. Well, there is no table in 2024. Let's get to the big spoiler. This is a very different situation. And let's just take a second here and look at what the Dungeon Master's Guide has in 2014. 2014 is a huge section broken up into several pieces. One is how you could just quickly modify a monster. This is a lot like what 2024 is trying to tell you. You can borrow a stat block and just reskin it, which is excellent advice, and just have fun. You can change up weapons without much issue, right? You could change, like, grab a shield or not and just make quick adjustments to the stat block. You could give it a special trait, right? Like say, hey, I'm going to take a troll and make it two-headed and give it this trait from a list of traits that's down below. Cool, very good advice. And then they say, hey, step 2, you could want to create a quick monster and just make a few changes using a table so that you can quickly come up with a monster. And that's a really neat idea, right? Like, let's not overdo it. It's our home campaign. Let's just weave something together. And here you decide what's your CR, and we get this table. And this table gives us offensive and defensive stats for every CR. So CR1 should have a proficiency bonus of +2, an attack bonus of +3. And these numbers honestly kind of work well. In some ways, they work better than the average of what monsters are for published sources. Like, I wish they were kind of more like this. Now, in 2024, monsters have changed a fair bit. So this represents the 2014 way of building. And again, these are the 2014 rules we're looking at. But back then, they gave you this whole table of what monsters should be and let you work off of this. So you could quickly grab this. In fact, you could run a monster, just make up what it is, and just use this for the hit points and the attacks and so on, and you're done. As I'll show you later, there's some things I'd like the table to do a little better, so that it's a little, different. But in general, you've got what you need, like your saving throws and so on, so that you can just play off of that. Then we can get into the idea that when you're doing a quick monster, you can quickly compare the defense and the offense of what you've done. And if there's a difference between it, then change the CR by that amount, or go in and change something table-wise. So let me make sure this is clear. If I look at this table and I was creating a CR1 creature, I could potentially give it lower hit points, so take that from the CR1 half, and give it a higher damage per round. And that would sort of equate, right? That's the concept that they're telling you here when you're doing a quick monster. The next thing they do is tell us how to make a detailed monster. And I'll page down to that. So here, when we're creating a full-fledged monster stat block, now we can go through this process, and it walked us through every step of what we would do and how to derive all of the factors for the monster, and then how to weigh them against each other. Look, again, that idea of the defense versus offense, does it work against the table, and how to modify it. And it had all kinds of things, like I said, hit dice based on the size, right? A lot of things to try to make your monster feel like it fits into what D&D expects and play should be driven by. Resistances and immunities and how to change that. Different factors for calculating your attack bonuses. So things like you can use the strength score or use the table, right? And that's kind of a neat idea, or your dexterity if it's that kind of a monster. So there was a lot of option, a lot of variance in how you could approach it. There were some options you could tap into, but also a lot of discussion of the how, right? Look at all these words, how to derive all these different figures and explaining and walking through options. Really cool. And then at the end, you could get all these special traits. And I'll page down to that and you see how much advice there is. And here we could look at these features and say, well, we could give it what the orc has about being aggressive, or the ambusher feature from the doppelganger, the blind senses of Grimlock. And if we do that, does that change something else in terms of the CR or anything like that? And this table would help you understand to do that. So back to 2024, again, here we see very little, right? We just get a few bits of advice on languages, proficiencies, senses. But in general, these are all things that don't affect the challenge rating, which is also to say things that aren't super powerful or super interesting. This all tends to represent how 2014 worked. It's just a lot less, right? So, hey, you can change out what spell this creature knows. Try not to replace a non-damage dealing spell with one that deals damage. All right, sure. You can change the name and flavor of an attack. You can change the type of damage. So skeleton, that is a nice skeleton because it deals cold damage. And this is all fine advice, but as we saw, 2024 gave us a lot more. We don't get anything in this whole section about how to build a monster from scratch. This is just about tweaking an existing monster. Nothing is telling us how to build a new monster. We do get some traits that we can add, and unlike that big list you saw before, with lots of examples to existing monsters, and even discussions of how it changes the CR, here we just get traits that we can add, like it's battle ready, it has advantage on initiative rolls, or death jinx, when the creature dies, one random creature within 10 feet is targeted by a bane spell. These are super fun. They're a lot like the monster powers that I put in Forge of Foes with my friends Scott Fitzgerald Gray and Mike Shea. But as cool as they are not how to build a monster. And that's it. We don't get anything else here, right? Let's take a look at, speaking of, Forge of Foes. So Forge of Foes actually provides you with, right up front, we have a lot of things that we cover in this supplement. And for those of you who've backed it, thank you. One of the things that's super fun is already telling us how much they're using it and how great it's been at their games. Thank you for that. So we have a lot that we cover in what you can do around the use of monsters. But what Forge of Foes also does right off the bat is show you how to build a monster using a table that we've created. This becomes even more useful now that 2024's DMG doesn't give us a table for creating a monster. So we walk you through the process and a faster, quicker process for creating a monster using this table. So you can see we give you the challenge rating, by challenge rating, all of the different statistics you can use. And these are based on our play and our examples. And then we also give you monster templates so you can quickly make it an aberration or a beast or a celestial or a dragon or a construct. And we then give you additional monster powers that you can give to them. And these are super fun things that I love using this in my game to change up my monsters. So all of this is made so that you can create a monster really quickly, but really well. And that's unfortunately what 2014 did well that 2024 does not. You cannot make a monster from scratch that's going to really feel like a great monster. You can tweak a monster, but not make one. I can't say enough that I think this is really a loss for the creator community. Removing that section for how to create a monster from scratch is really a loss. That was something that made it easier for DMs and creators to rise up the ranks of understanding how monsters can be made and how to make them to a level that would approximate a D&D version with some of the math behind it, right? Which is a lot easier than having to just mimic the stats in a statistic block, right? Mimicking that by saying, well, this is sort of like an ogre, so I'm going to sort of give it its hit points, doesn't answer what the actual range is for that monster. And so if D&D 2024 has changed things, it really should find some way to communicate to the creator community, hey, here is that table of what we consider to be valid. And even though 2014 was not 100% accurate, it was a great starting point, right? You could make a very functional, very good monster using that table. Now you can use Forge of Foes either as a creator or as a DM at home, but we don't know what those 2024 targets are. And I really hope Wizards will do that, will give us what that target should be. What is the spread that we can expect for CR X? What is the maximum and minimum hit points, the maximum minimum damage, and so on that they're expecting? And ideally, the whole set of monster creation. But right now, we don't have that. Till then, Forge of Foes. Next, the 2024 DMG tells us how to create a magic item. And again, we're told how to modify magic items. And I somewhat understand this here because creating magic items is not quite a scientific process. It's a loose way of comparing strength so that you come up with it. But there can still be a process. In fact, James Introcaso wrote a really, really nice guide on the D&D Beyond website on how to make a magic item. I include the shortcuts of his advice in my spreadsheet that I give to Patreon supporters because it's so useful to think through that approach. And that could have been here. But instead, we are told, hey, you can change the form of an item. It's a ring of the ram. Well, it can be a rod of the ram. Okay, sure. That's a useful reminder. Doesn't tell me how to make another item that's like that, but, like totally different. Ring of the bear, right? How do I do that? What does that mean? We're told that you can do things like change the damage type. So flame tongue sword, but it's lightning. Yep, sure. Okay. And some interesting things here. We are told you can combine items into a single item so long as only one requires attunement. And it gives you a vague, this makes the item more powerful and probably increases its rarity, but it won't break your game. And I think that's really interesting, right? So you can see this here, combining items. I think that's super fascinating because to me, whoa, we've automatically made this item stronger. There's no question about it. And the question I would ask as a DM or as a creator, how do I know that it is not too strong? Do you have any advice for that? No. And, what I would say as a home DM, here's the advice I'd give you. Combine magic items rather than awarding multiple items. So if you're going to give out a Ring of the Ram and a +1 sword, what if you gave out a +1 sword that can push foes away the way a Ring of the Ram does? Or it's a hammer and you can break down a door the way that a Ring of the Ram could, right? If you start thinking in that way, I was going to give you 2 magic items, but I gave you 1 combined. Now we're not really that much stronger, or at least we're not giving out too much magic. It's the same amount, but it's more useful. And what this does is it cuts down on the number of throwaway items or on the amount of time that players are going to spend with their characters pulling out an item, which nobody wants to do. Like, it's the worst thing. Characters and players are rightfully allergic to spending a whole action going through their pack and getting things out, right? So this makes it really clear, well, hey, I want this Ring of the Ram effect, but it's in my hammer, so I'm going to use it, and that's going to be awesome, right? The rules, we reviewed this in one of my previous videos, say a party might get 100 magic items over 20 levels. Tons of those are just dead weight that you either, at best, carry in your backpack, if not throw away or just forget about. So combining them makes this less likely. You can even combine things like potions, right? You're going to give out a potion of healing. Just have that magic weapon or armor or whatever give you the ability to 3 times ever give you the effect of a potion of healing. Call it something else, give it some flavor. Maybe there's like an emblem on the shield or on the armor that goes away when it's the whole idea. You're binding a consumable into the normal item, and that's totally fine because all they're going to do is pop that potion anyway, and this just makes it a little easier to do. If you want an action spent, then write that in the description, but combining magic items this way is super effective. In a published adventure, here you need to worry about the power of it relative to other options you're giving out and whether it's going to break any of the game balance. So that's important to think about. The more that an item is permanent, not just attunement, but that it's something you could do often, that could create power if normally you would not be able to say hold 2 of them or something like that. And that could be a little too strong, right? If they're 2 really good shields and you're just going to combine them both into one shield, that's probably too strong. So think through that as sort of how to approach it. But what about actually making a new item? We thankfully do get a section here. It's not perfect, but hey, you know what? 2014 wasn't perfect here either. So we do get here this idea that, okay, in general, magic items should let you do something they can't do before or make what they do better. So Ring of Jumping lets you jump more easily, greater distance. That makes it stronger, right? And this is a good idea. And then we get a table on power level, and you'll find this in my spreadsheet as well for those of you who are Patreon supporters. This idea of like, okay, what is the rarity? What is the maximum spell level and the maximum bonus to hit that we can expect from this rarity level? That's a decent gauge. And we can look at the process of attunement, because attunement is going to tell us whether you can have, how many of these powerful items you can have. So attunement is a lockdown on how strong your character can get by limiting too many items. Again, that's an important factor when you're combining things. If you're combining non-attuning items into an attunement item, that attunement item is a stronger magic item than it was before, because it gets you past that limit, right? One item doing a lot and being one of your attunement items. One thing they don't really say in the advice here is that really, when I make a magic item, I really do look at comparable items of the rarity that it is, and maybe the rarity above or below, or even both, if I'm not sure what kind of power level I'm hitting. So that to me is the most important advice. Like, make an item, if you're making it from scratch, cool. Now compare it to what else is available, right? And think through whether this is really more powerful. Ask yourself that fair question. If I was the player, would I be really excited to have this and use it all the time, which is what we want, but not because it's miles ahead or a strong degree ahead beyond the other comparable items. For creating a spell, we again get guidance as to what kind of damage values we can expect for spells, the approach we can generally take towards it. And it's not a full process that I would say. It's not like an educational piece on how to approach making a spell, but more just general guidance of the process. So, give it a unique name. If it's too good such that you'd want to use it all the time, it's probably too good, right? That's reasonable. Make sure it fits the identity of the caster, right? If it's a druid spell, then it should be a certain kind of nature-based type, elemental type thing. If it's a wizard or sorcerer spell, it shouldn't heal, that kind of thing. And just a general thing told here, longer duration, greater range, these all make it more powerful. And in fact, what they say is it can make up for a lesser effect depending on the spell. So if it's a spell that would seem to be weaker, but it does more of this, like it has a larger area of effect, think of a fireball being just bigger, that would be better, right? So if you could do a weaker fireball and make it bigger, and that could work, is what they're kind of saying. Make spells useful, so don't make them so limited and specific, right? If it's something that only damages oozes. So this is all fine advice. It's not a ton of advice, but it's something. And then we're told, hey, here's this table on what the damage should be of the spell. And that if it's a healing spell, it can be that same magical range. Now, what's interesting is this has actually changed from before. So let's take a look at that. So here you can see my adventure, encounter, and monster design spreadsheet. And you can see that for 2024, there have been a few changes both to the max spell level in those magic items that we talked about. So that change in red, 5th level, that's a difference in 2024. And the expected spell damage here has changed from the old tables in a couple of different levels. It's interesting, I don't know why that would have changed from before. You can see here old tables like 2d6 to 46 to 66. And here it goes 2d6, 3d6, cd6, 66. So it's gone from 46 to 3 to 6 here. I don't know that was super important in terms of the home math that you might use, but if you're a creator doing official work, important to note that this has changed. Looking what 2024 provides, it's really interesting that it's not all there, right? So if I look at 2014, interesting that there was creating a race or subrace, what we would call a species, modifying a class. And in fact, we got the example of the Eladrin as something there. So you could even see a new one there. We got modifying a class, how to change the proficiencies and spell lists, restricting class access, right? A lot of words here providing all these options. A spell point variant, right? And then, of course, the creating a background piece. There was also in the NPC section, we had how to create NPCs and NPC classes. We got the example of like the Death Cleric was there and an anti-paladin type approach. Those are really cool options. So there was a little more that 2014 was giving us on how to do that. The villainous options of Oathbreaker, I think is what the Paladin was, the anti-Paladin. This wasn't just a nice thing we could use like a Death Domain Cleric, but it helped us understand how you create a subclass, right? And that was very helpful. The creating NPCs section was also just bigger overall. It could be argued that for the space, the 2024 system is better, but it gave you a little more options on how to create an NPC, which was nice. Random encounters, we have the same guidance in 2024, but 2014 had example tables and information on crafting one. And then, which I think is really critical, like how to create interesting random encounter tables would have been great advice in 2024, particularly doing things like taking some of the advances that appear in D&D's own adventures. That would be really cool. In 2014, we had an appendix with lists of monsters by environment, which was super helpful for creating those random encounters. And Xanathars actually gave us these random encounter tables by environment. And you can, of course, still go get the old books. But it was nice when it was in this one book as a resource we could turn to. 2014 also had a system for random dungeon design that was more involved than what we see in 2024. Both the rooms in a dungeon and stocking those rooms in better ways, monster motivation, dungeon hazards, traps and tricks, and then different aspects of the dungeon, like the dungeon dressing, which I really love as fodder for creativity, and just in general to help new DMs understand how to make your dungeon interesting and what to add to it. By reading through those lists, you get more ideas and get this feeling of, oh yeah, that would be better than just a plain old room. I'm going to do these things and get in the habit of doing this kind of thing. Something that we don't find in either book, but you can find elsewhere, in addition to what I showed with Forge of Foes, is Tasha's had group patrons, sidekicks, and puzzles. And patrons were really a great system that I think speaks to a lot of campaigns where you want to have somebody that can act as the DM voice and guide people. So knowing how to build a patron was really helpful for a lot of campaigns. And it's a shame that it didn't kind of permeate the D&D 5e ecosystem better. And if it had been in 2024 DMG, I think it really could have done that. Sidekicks, which is especially useful if you're playing with just a couple of players and you need something to go in for one or two players as this sort of NPC they can control, that can help them. Maybe the DM's controlling it, maybe the player's controlling it. That was a really fun system. I had issues with the system as it's presented, but it was better than not having the option. Puzzle advice is important just because that's a big part of D&D, and not everybody likes puzzles. So having good advice would have been great to see that pulled across from Tasha's. Xanathars had things like lists of names, a system for players to determine origins and life events. And then, of course, the big one that I like to talk about is downtime. There was all of this awesome concept of what you do in between adventures in Xanathar's Guide to Everything that built on the Player's Handbook and DMG 2014 versions and their downtime information. But then on top of it, you had the Acquisitions Incorporated book, which is right there. And that book, which I helped design, had a lot of downtime specific to the idea of running a business or being part of an organization and doing things with your party like that. I have an extensive blog series on downtime at alphastream.org. So if that's of interest, check that out for that guidance, which I think is even more important because there's no downtime at all so far in 2024. Yeah, so it goes. So I hope this has been helpful looking at what the DMG teaches us to create in 2024 and how I see that compared to 2014 and what else is there. If you have enjoyed this and other videos that I create, thank you. If you can, like, subscribe, tell your friends about me, right? That really is big deal. If you see me sharing a post on Mastodon or on Blue Sky, retweet that so that others see it. That's very helpful. Thank you. And also, if you are able to, if you can support me on Patreon, that goes a long way towards my creating more of these videos, more blog posts, and more cool resources. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.